Back in the early 2000s, a friend went out to eat, and he looked over and saw a family of four all at the table with their heads bowed and assumed that they were praying. But as you might have guessed, they weren't praying. They were all on their phones. This was about 2007, 2008. And what strikes me about that story and why I would bring it up to almost 20 years later is that after about 20 years, I'm not sure any of us would have made the same mistake. We would just know what's going on. It's something we've come accustomed to, these magical devices, these screens, these sort of endless possibilities around us. And if it were easy to just say, you know what, we don't need all of that, and let's all go leave church and go throw our phones in Barren River, that would be that. Now, be honest, how many of you sort of had a little spark of joy when I suggested throwing your phone into the river? It tells us that there's a tension here. It tells us that nobody, when they handed us these magical devices, said, okay, here are the boundaries. Here's how you need to navigate the complexities. We didn't know, and we've been figuring it out together. Who has given us help? That's, I think, a really important question as we think about that tension that we're living in between presence and productivity, both of which are important. Or we might name that tension as engagement and entertainment, also, some valuable things. Maybe the tension between virtual connection and being so connected in so many ways, and in-person, real life connection, which has been a challenge. There's a tension here. And we want to name that tension together. In fact, over the next 6 weeks, we want to give a very specific name to that tension and then start to think about how we might, maybe 20 years in, start to navigate that tension. And so the word is distraction, the tension between attention and distraction. And to name it exactly that way, because we call it a lot of things. We call it being scattered or unfocused, or a word that we use a lot, busy. But is it that? Is it about activity, or is it about focus? Is it about something else? The word distracted is where we are landing. In fact, what we're talking about is being undistracted in a world where it's not easy to live with focus. And as we've already said, we're going to talk about things that we are being distracted by. But more importantly, what we are being distracted from. Our whole sermon series for the next 6 weeks will bring us to that focus on things that we probably would say we really care about. And a heightened awareness of how important those things are. And then what we're being distracted from. The thing that we need, the life that we would choose. And in our scripture today, we found somebody who is distracted. We're going to start here. I have to say, a lot of people hate this story. Like Martha, by the way, Martha Christian is at a family reunion this week. And I don't know if you've been at a family reunion. Sometimes you look forward to those. Sometimes you don't. She said, I'd much rather be at a family reunion than listen to the sermon that takes my name in vain. Poor Martha. I want to kind of name that tension too as we get started. Martha has gotten a bad rap, and I think we need to be kind to Martha as we are kind to ourselves. So, but this is such a thing that there are t-shirts made about it. So here's one. Martha, no one is helping. Martha, 30 AD. Raise your hand if you have said that in the last 2 or 3 days, right? And there's another version that says, Lord, it's a prayer, Lord, and no one is helping. Right? You walk into the kitchen, hypothetically, and you don't look at your family if they're here, and you say, Lord, no one is helping. Martha gets a bad rap because she looks so angry in that picture, right? Okay, and then this other t-shirt, there's another one. This is, maybe not. There's one, no. It's all black, and you can't see it because she's all blacked out. But it says, Martha, somebody has to keep things running. Yeah. Raise your hand if you ever feel that way. Like, well, if I just sit, who's going to do, right? And so Martha, I think, was just doing the thing that she knew to do. In fact, probably dealing with the hand that she had been dealt in her place in life. She was doing really what she thought was the best way she could to love God. When the teacher shows up, there was sort of a prescribed way this happened. The disciples would sit at the master's feet and the women would offer the hospitality. Those were the rules. And nobody told Martha that the rules had changed when Jesus walked into that room. And the same is true with us. We are distracted by a lot of things, as we see Martha is, and we don't know. We are still trying to come to terms with what it means that Jesus has changed everything. And so we read in Luke 10:40, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Distracted here literally means to be drug around, to be pulled away. She isn't simply busy, she's distracted. It is about activity, but it's about something more fundamental. It's about being able to pay attention and show up in your life and see what's really going on and not feel so scattered or pulled in a lot of directions. And so Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and you are upset about many things. You hear the numbers, like there's lots of things. It's starting to feel like it's piling up. Maybe you can feel that. Maybe you know what that feels like. Jesus calls her worried, which really means divided into parts. We in the South say she went all to pieces. She's going all to pieces. And Jesus uses another word that means distracted, but it has a noise component. Usually it's about some kind of clamor, sort of like things are kind of crazy, it's loud. Only this is not outside of her, it's on the inside. And maybe you too understand that internal clamor. We are not the first people on the planet to be distracted, and to be distracted by good things. Again, if they were all bad, we would say just cut it out. But there's a tension, and Martha is living into that tension, and so is Mary. And Martha is feeling a noisy upheaval inside. Jesus says her name. What we don't know is how he said it. You don't get that in the context, right? If you watch these internet videos that change the whole meaning of a sentence by just putting the emphasis on a different syllable or a different word gets the different point of emphasis, how does Jesus say her name? It's like, Martha, Martha, come on, man. Or is it more an invitation? More like when he said Mary Magdalene's name at the tomb, inviting her into the resurrection reality. Martha, Martha. He says her name twice, certainly to get her attention. She's distracted. What does she need? She needs attention. She needs focus. She needs attentiveness. Martha isn't just busy, she's distracted. And as you read all of Luke 10, you see this even more clearly. Luke 10 is a really special chapter. I'd invite you to go home and read it. If you do, send me a text or an email. We'll get the bonus points logged for you, like the extra, you get an A for the sermon kind of thing. No, if you go home and read it, you see this in context. There's a lot of activity, actually, in Luke 10. It's kind of all about activity. This story almost stands out as weird because for example, the story right before this is the story, anybody know? The Good Samaritan, which is, as we sort of usually tell that story, a story about two people who should have done something and didn't, and one person who shouldn't have done something but did. And to make sure that is so clearly stated at the end as they're wrestling with what to do and how to be a good neighbor, which is the question behind the Good Samaritan, Jesus says these words, go and do likewise. It's like marching orders. The story before that is Jesus sending out 72 people. Like there's action in it. That story, it says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray that God would send workers into the harvest. You could read Luke 10 and it's like, all right, Martha, you're the right one for going and doing, for being a worker. So the story seems to be in tension if you read it as a story about activity and inactivity. But we've already said it's not, it's not about that, is it? It's about whether you're paying attention. So let's go back to the Good Samaritan story. Do you think maybe if you remember that story, the two people that didn't do something, the priest and the Levi, what was their main issue? They were distracted by any number of things, including perhaps their very religion. distracted from really seeing the person in front of them. And then the Samaritan is the one we would not expect to act or deceive. He's the one that notices. And so maybe that's what these stories are about. Let's come to Mary. Mary is the one who paid attention. She was the one who saw. She was the one who got what was going on and sat at Jesus' feet. That part of the story, I will admit, drives me nuts, right? For those of us who are like, Lord, there's no one helping, and you have the mystical people in your life who never get distracted and miss the forest because of the trees. They're not down there in the details. They're up here kind of floating in wonderland and noticing things. Mystical people, it drives me crazy, especially when they're right. And that's Mary. It's not really about whether she's helping or not. It's about whether she notices that Jesus has shown up and that Jesus has changed everything. Martha was distracted. I keep making the point. She was distracted, even by good things. And so are we. That's nothing new. But what is new is something that I really think we should be talking about together. What's different is that we add to that list of many good things that we are kind of busy doing and being productive of, or just all the things that kind of weigh us down or make us feel kind of like we're coming apart or it's hard to hold life together. That's a human thing. But we add to that an entire economy that is built on trying to get your attention, trying to get your focus. And so let me give you some statistics. After 8:15, some people asked if we would put this out there so you can kind of see it and maybe share it. So we'll do that on our social media, even as I talk about social media here in a second. So did you know Americans spend 6 hours a day consuming digital media and entertainment? It's just like starting to bring some awareness to what has happened to us. 6 hours a day. And so we now, as Americans, spend more time watching our phones than watching television. And so since 2007, 2008, when the people were not praying at the table, that has become more of a thing. You may remember when you maybe somebody had an iPhone and you didn't, and you were like, why are they looking down all the time? Now it's, of course, normal. And we watch those screens more than we watch the big ones. And then I've heard this stat for the last year or so, and so sort of getting our head around it, that's not just Americans, it's global. And so globally, people spend an average on social media alone, they spend an average a day of 2 hours and 21 minutes, every adult on the planet. 2 hours and 21 minutes every day. And that adds up, if you just put all that time together, in the course of a year, 35 days. So in 2026, every adult on our planet will average out to spending over a month on social media. Think about what you could do with a month, right? As we hear the invitation, Martha, Martha, or your name repeated a couple times. What could you do if you could just take a month and not go to work? If you could take a month and focus on just enjoying time with your family. You could take a month and go serve in a way. You see the invitation in this? This is not about guilt and shame, but it is about awareness and then being intentional about what we want to do. Here's the other kind of stat that I think is important. We're learning this is affecting our brains, and you may know this already. But back in 2004, before we got the phones, before we got the screens in the world in our pockets, our average attention span was 2.5 minutes. Now it is down to 47 seconds, and it is decreasing, 47 seconds, which means that some of you have completely lost the thread of this sermon about 7 times already. And that's just, it's not me, it's you. No, it's like... And so attention is now recognized as one of the greatest of all commodities. People are vying to get your attention, and so it's like he's coming faster. It's wiring our brains to expect that. And so what people are saying is that we no longer live in an information economy. We live in an attention economy. It's been monetized. And so the advertisers are actually telling you something that you need to know, which is your attention is valuable. It's valuable, but maybe not in the way that it has been monetized. They've discovered what the traditions of the church have long said, which is where you focus is where your life is headed. It will drive your decisions, and it is doing that to us whether we are aware of it or not. That whatever gets your focus gets you. Bob Goff has written a great book about this called Undistracted. See what I just did? A very quick transition, 47 seconds in. Bob Goff has written it was not funny. Thank you for laughing. Bob Goff has written a book about this called Undistracted. In it, he writes a lot about what we do about this. It's a great book, and Bob Goff is really engaging. I don't think I'm Bob Goff, so I read the book. I'm like, okay, I see how he's doing this. I've got to find my way. That's just kind of how I read it. But he says this: the way to defeat distraction is to be captivated by something greater. And this brings us back to Mary, because Mary is captivated. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus, and that breaks the rules, because in her world, the women were supposed to be offering the hospitality, and the disciples were supposed to be sitting at the feet of Jesus. But she and the Good Samaritan have something in common. They are unlikely heroes. In a world where Samaritans couldn't be good or a neighbor, and women couldn't be disciples, Jesus walks in and it changes. And we have continued to wrestle with what that really means. In a world that confines us to certain roles, and in that mismatch distracts us. This year, in 2026, the United Methodist Church has celebrated 70 years of women in ordained ministry. That's something to celebrate, right? As we still wrestle, in other denominations are wrestling with that question. We celebrated it 70 years ago, and as we celebrated that at our annual conference this year, our Bishop Graves says, "Good job. We are only 1,900 years behind Jesus." Right? Good for us. We're only 1,900 years behind Jesus. And so it is in a lot of ways as we wrestle with what does it mean that Jesus has shown up and is tearing down things that need to be torn down and building up things that bring wholeness and healing and life. We're living in that tension between attentiveness and distraction. And naming it that way, I think, is helpful because we are not only being distracted by those things that are vying for our attention, we are being distracted from things that really, really matter. And so we want to talk about that. As Jesus is doing a new thing, I don't want to miss it because I'm looking down at my phone. So what are we being distracted from? Thank you for asking. That's where we will focus for the next 6 weeks and where I just want to land today. As we think about the things that matter to us, we're going to talk about being undistracted from our grounded identity and all the messages about who we are and the mix and mess of finding out what our true identity is in Christ. We are distracted and we are acting from a place that isn't our true selves in Christ, our redeemed selves through Him. Undistracted from what matters most to us, our values, the things that we say that we want and then struggle to put into practice. And these are the sermon titles, by the way, for the next 6 weeks. Undistracted from the person right in front of us, which we all are. When my daughter Sarah Grace was little, she had a speech impediment. She had a pretty hard time pronouncing certain vowels, so it made it very hard to understand her. And she would say the thing, and we would not understand her. Those of us, it's been a long time, but we didn't. She was hard. It was really hard, and I'll never forget when she could say an E. She would say dadden, dadden, and we would say daddy, and she would say dudden, and then we were in the moment where she said dad. And we went nuts. So, but we had years of really struggling to understand. There's two ways to deal with that if you have that challenge. One is to kind of shrink into the background and not say a lot, and that is not the option my daughter chose. The other was to hold our attention painfully so until we got it. We would say, She learned, we would say it back to her. She learned that she would make us say it back to her until we got it. So fast forward in 2026, we're watching the World Cup. And we're watching soccer. She's also talking. And I'm doing the thing, right? And I heard some noises over here, and there was something happening over here. And she said, "Dad, did you hear what I said?" And I said, "I lied." I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, really? Give me your eyes." She's the kid, right? "Let me see your eyes." "What did I say?" "Honey, I have no idea." She goes, "We both knew that already, didn't we?" Yeah. Anyway, it's that kind of thing. Most of us don't have someone that intentional forcing us to pay attention. It's not all good. It's not all bad. So what are the boundaries? To not be distracted from the people that will discover what love looks like by our attentiveness to them. Undistracted, this is a sermon that's coming in a little over a month. Undistracted from doing hard things. Because we all have to do things that are not comfortable and not easy. And if we don't feel like we have the focus and the energy, we're not going to be able to do them. And where does that leave us? And then finally, undistracted, and this is the theme through the whole thing, from joy. Back to Jesus saying Martha's name twice. "Martha, Martha." The invitation is into the resurrection reality, which is always about joy. It is the fullness of life that is being offered to us in Jesus. The thing that we will miss out on the most is being distracted from God's eternal life given to us as a gift now. But Jesus was never distracted from that, was he? And so we're going to use his life as our model. Jesus was never distracted. Think about that. Jesus was never distracted. What would that be like? Jesus also knows that we are. And so the invitation is out of one life into another, as is always the case, into what is needed. "Martha, Martha, you worried about and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed." That's where our prayer took us this morning. The one thing that is necessary, which is what we all want and what we all struggle to find. Mary figures out what is needed. She sits at Jesus' feet and is captivated by him. That's a good place to start, isn't it? Into the life that we are being offered. And so I'm going to skip, Jim, down to those last questions. I want to have two questions to ponder before we come to communion this week. And the first is this: what has your attention that hasn't earned it? There we go. Thank you. What has your attention that hasn't earned it? Isn't that kind of a good frame, right? For us, as we walk into this week, what am I looking for is just awareness. What has our attention that hasn't earned it? And then in that same way, in a matter of awareness, what deserves our attention, or maybe who deserves our attention but doesn't have it? One final word there. That is not a call to go back to Martha land and be worried and concerned about many things. You could read that question and think, oh my gosh, the list is too long. It is not. Only one thing is needed. And then everything else can come out of that. And that is the way God made us. If we are overwhelmed, that is not the voice of God saying you need to do more or the list is too long. We are made to live from a place of peace and wholeness. And so that the list is manageable. It makes me think of, we did a series a few years ago where we gave everybody a cross to put in their pocket. Remember that? And carry it with them. And I was trying to be relatable, and I said, oh gosh, now I have another thing to have to remember, and that's it'll disrupt my life. I have to remember my keys, my wallet, my glasses, my phone, and now the cross. And next Sunday, one of our moms who had two small children came and said, "You have 5 things." And then she handed me her list and said, "I have 47. And it was true, right? Being a parent of a young kid is not easy. I was not so relatable. My point did not hit very well. And that's true, I think, actually for all of us as we think about our list. How do we distill it down to the thing that's needful? What deserves our attention but doesn't have it will actually mean that there are some things that just don't deserve our attention, and that's okay. And so hopefully you will come to a place of peace as we each week come to that prayer moment where we started today, just taking a deep breath and trusting that God is with us.